Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are thinking about sonnets, and there's a very interesting claim about sonnets, which is that modern thought and modern consciousness emerged with the invention of the sonnet in the 13th century Italy. And the reason for that is that the sonnet is the first type of poetry that was not written for oral transmission, but was rather written entirely to be read silently to oneself. So it was a very, very individual process, a kind of meditative process. The sonnet is also fascinating because it's like a little prison. It has so many rules to it, and it's very boxy. You have your 14 lines in a little box. And because of that, because the form is so restricting, it forces you to use language in entirely new ways. So it was a very innovative form as well, because it really did cause writers to make up new words, to make up new phrasing for ideas, and to expand what literature really can do with its resources. So it is an act of self-conscious reflection that exists in the sonnet. So today we're going to read a few, but most importantly we're going to scan them, which, while it is a bit boring, it's very, very restful, because all we're going to do is read each line and think about where the stressed and unstressed syllables are. And we're also going to think about the three sections the sonnet has, which is a proposition, a volta, and a resolution. So sonnets begin a certain way and always have some sort of tonal or conceptual shift in it, depending on the type of sonnet that it is. So we'll think about both Petrarchan sonnets and Shakespearean sonnets, and we'll read examples of both. So I hope this will be a very sleepy video for you, a bit like counting sheep, except we're counting syllables. This is the beginning of The Birth of the Modern Mind, Self-Consciousness and the Invention of the Sonnet by Paul Oppenheimer. This is where he makes the claim that modern thought began with the sonnet, with the first written form intended to be read to oneself, to be experienced individually rather than with a community, as you might have seen with Greek theater, which kind of depended on a group catharsis. Sonnets are very different. They happen alone, which is what makes them, in my opinion, so spectacular. So I'll begin reading a bit about this because it's the background of sonnets, and then we'll move on to a few sonnets I have as examples, and we'll scan them, which should make you very sleepy because it's a bit like counting sheep. So, modern thought and literature began with the invention of the sonnet. Created in the early Duecento by Giacomo Latino, a notaro, an important court official, and probably lawyer at the court of Emperor Frederick II, it is the first lyric form since the fall of the Roman Empire, intended not for music or performance, but for silent reading. As such, it is the first lyric of self-consciousness, or of the self in conflict. The sonnet's peculiar 14-line structure, which has intrigued countless poets ever since. The sonnet remains to this day the oldest poetic form still in wide popular use. That is interesting, isn't it? Because it is still widely in popular use. And we will read, I believe I have a modern one for us. I can't remember. With its is traceable to Plato's Timaeus, with its mathematical description of the architecture of the human soul and of heaven. The architecture of the human soul. I love literature, and those of you who have seen The Brutalist recently, a great film, I suggest anyone to see it, understand that architecture is not... Architecture, oh my god, I can't spell, is an argument. You know, it is a manifested representation of the mind. And so in The Brutalist, you see this Holocaust survivor recreating the camps, but in a different way, and that it reaches the sky. It's really fascinating. So in this case, the sonnet becomes a bit of architecture, and it is an architecture because it has such a foundation, right? Without that foundation, it would collapse. It's a bit like building a building, the sonnet is. The sonnet seeks to catch and echo the melodies unheard of the human soul, to use Keats' phrase, melodies both passionate and silent, both intimate and celestial. Given its fresh and deep appeal, it should come as no surprise that the sonnet immediately caught on, thrilling poets of clever scuola siciliana surrounding Frederick and influencing poets of the dolce stil nuovo, such as Dante and Petrarch. I have Petrarch, actually, we're going to read. He, of course, is famous for the sonnet, for love sonnets and blazons. And blazons are poems that point out the individual features, most often of a woman, to profess one's love to her. And so we'll look at those, but these are his love poems, and we'll take a look at a few of these. I'm just already fascinated by this one. This is actually a book from when I was in college. I went to Boston University 2 decades ago now, and so these are my notes from when I went to Boston University. Isn't that fun? I go my way regretting those past times I spent in loving something which was mortal instead of soaring high, since I had wings that might have taken me to higher levels. You who see all my shameful... Okay, we got to read this one. I'm going to put my bookmark in. We'll come back to this one. We're not ready for Petrarch yet. I got carried away. But the Petrarchan sonnet and the Shakespearean sonnet are very different, so we'll take a look at both. It has to do with their breakdowns. All right. So, Frederick himself wrote a number of sonnets, and his brilliant court, which resounded with intellectual argument and fervour, the fervour of the incipient Renaissance, the rediscovery of the classics and of ancient and buried ideas, produced many of them. This new form was quickly understood as a new way of thinking about mankind. Written forms, they come with that kind of fascinating effect to the mind, and I think we're going through one now, and everyone knows we are to an extent, with social media and the way we consume media now, in this kind of what I would call bathos. And bathos is the juxtaposition of the absurd with the serious. It's common in Shakespeare. I'm actually writing a book which I'm trying to think about entirely through bathos, which is just a book written on the juxtaposition of the absurd and the serious, or the false and the true. I'm kind of thinking about those two things, because currently our media puts what is fiction right next to what is truth, and so you have trouble discerning when you do that, but not relevant to sonnets. Anyway, when I put my glasses back on, I can't actually read with them off. I don't know why I took them off. Okay, there you go. Emotional problems, especially problems in love, needed no longer merely be expressed or performed. They might now actually be resolved, or provisionally resolved, through the logic of a form that turned expression inward, to a resolution in the abiding peace of the soul itself. Now, this is what's fascinating, because again, art up until then was about catharsis, emotional release. It was not necessarily about resolution. And you have to think about what resolution actually means when we think about it. If art's intention in the sonnet is for resolution, I don't understand, how does resolution differ from catharsis? That might be a question we ask, and perhaps I'll write it down here on my whiteboard that I have here, that I struggle to use because my light shows up on it. But the big, see, there's the ring light. That's dumb. Okay, but anyway, the question we might ask is, how does resolution... Hi, ring light. I'm going to have to figure out how to fix that. If anyone knows, please tell me. Differ from lighting has always been my arch nemesis. Okay, how does resolution differ from catharsis? And if we think about catharsis as emotional release, primarily from Greek tragedies where we kind of saw it, a resolution is a sense that something is closed. Closed. You know, but I don't know. I'm going to keep it on here so I don't forget what I'm asking myself. And we'll come back to it. But how does resolution differ from catharsis? In the comments, let me know. I know so many of you are just brilliant people, like the viewers of this channel are always impressing me. You know more than I do about most things. So do let me know what you think about this question, and I'll come back to it. Probably need to do some research. It might be that we need to look up an actual definition for it, both. And I find sometimes when you look up denotations, it gets easier to answer those questions. But that's something we think about. So catharsis might be a fact of expression, right? Sonnet is a fact of resolution. To resolution in the abiding peace of the soul itself, or if one were not so certain of the existence of the soul in reason. Okay. Now this is fascinating, right? The soul exists in reason, is what I've written it right there. Another claim. Reason, after all, was perceived as a manifestation of God's mind and of divine love. Ptolemaeus and his system of describing the known universe, coupled with neatly with the theology of St. Augustine and Boethius, had long since made that clear, ever since the 5th century. All medieval art, music, architecture, science, and literature were based on it, the idea that reason is the expression of God. And so if we could think about that, I think in this period we are in a period of illogic, of ill reason. And where is God now? God has become, to me, and I'm non-religious, I'm not a religious person, but to me I think God has become a bit of a excuse for amorality in a lot of ways. It is no longer reason. It's almost as if, oh, you hear that? That's the fire alarm. The town I live in is so small that we don't have a fire department. And so whenever there's a fire, this alarm goes off, and that is calling the volunteer fire department to action, essentially. And it's been going off a lot lately, I don't know why, but it went off this morning at 5 a.m. And again, very small town, and we live deep in the woods. And when it goes off at night, the coyotes start howling with it. So around 5 a.m. this alarm was going off and the coyotes were howling, and it was like really apocalyptic. It was really cool. I love apocalyptic stuff. Anyway, it kind of makes you think about the world differently when you... Blah, blah, blah. Reason, as announced by the orderliness of the heavens and church philosophy, reigned supreme. Order, order, order. The idea that there ought to be order, not disorder. Currently, we are entering into a period of chaos. Well, we all know that. All right. On the other hand, the idea of turning inward, implicit in the form of the sonnet, contained a dangerous question. One that had not been raised seriously since the Roman times. And then this is when we see that God might be challenged by the reason of the sonnet. If poets asked about their values, their being, their ontology, which the form seemed to require, would the results harmonize with church teachings and what was generally known about the world? Of course, the answer is no. The sonnet is where one tells the truth, I think is... And that is the biggest thing. And if we think about the architecture, it's almost as if the sonnet cannot stand without it. Without the truth, right? It requires the truth to stand. And so that is the sonnet in all of its glory. All right. Okay. To understand this question fully, the contents of the fashionable provincial love lyrics and love poetry of Giacomo's day must be distinguished from the mad, fascinating contents of the new sonnets. In fact, Giacomo's accomplishment and his influence on the literature around him, and indirectly over the next 700 years, cannot really be grasped without knowing something of the cultural landscape against which he worked. The important feature here, both in poetry and landscape, is what might be called distance, especially in poetry. Think about distance. Okay, let's think about that for a second. I don't fully understand it. This too is ultimately traceable to the Ptolemaic system with its idea of reason. So we really go on now to a goal, and I don't think I have anything more about the distance. I didn't print it out, and I haven't read it yet. But we'll think about distance. Interesting. I don't know. But I think the largest things we can draw from this is the idea that reason is the expression of God, and the sonnet is where one tells the truth. It is the architecture of the sonnet that it cannot stand without it. That it is a new form and a new way of thinking about mankind that depends upon a resolution rather than solely a catharsis. And it expresses the most important thing here is self in conflict. And so when we get to this idea of a dangerous question, the dangerous question is the fact that the self is in conflict. That nothing is simple, everything is complicated. I find when I talk to people in the world, people who don't read, they really struggle with black and white thinking. They think, oh, this is right and that's wrong. And they really, they have a hard time understanding nuance. And the more and more our society stops reading things like sonnets, the more and more our minds revert to this kind of, I don't want to say binary thinking, but a very concrete thinking, and a self-assuredness. I think that reading teaches you, above all things, doubt. And I think in a way God is doubt. I think in the way reason is doubt. It is reasonable to be doubtful. I think that science is doubt, right? And what it gives you is a doubt in your own intellectual superiority, a doubt in your own perspective, a doubt in your own rightness. And I think that that's really, really important. It gives you a sense of humility, reading does, and empathy really relies on humility in such an enormous way. And social media is removing our humility, I think, in a lot of ways. But anywho, let's move on now to the rules of the sonnet, because I've spoken about how it's like a little prison. Well, these are some sonnets we're going to look at. But I've spoken about how it's a little prison, so let's take a look. Put that away. Oh, where'd it go? Here's my journal. It's very nice. It has first you dream, then you do, right there. So we'll take a look at it. This is where I've written all the information about sonnets. Isn't this a nice pattern? It's a little crazy. You fill up the whole screen with this crazy pattern. But let's take a look at the rules of sonnets here. All right. So, the first poetic form, blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, I asked myself a question when I was reading about these, which is, what does this say then of the self if we do not read? How is the self developed if we don't read? And I guess we've just thought about that to an extent. But anyway, each sonnet has 3 sections, and I'll write that here. We'll kind of emphasize it here. So, perhaps if I turn off my ring light, it would help. Let's do that. let's do that. Let me just turn it off. Boop. Boop. Is that better? Oh, it's much better. Okay. So right now, just as we do this, I'll keep the line off. It'll be a little dark, but that's okay. This is a silly eraser, isn't it? Just gonna erase. I'm going to write down some of the essential aspects of the sonnet here so you can see it much bigger. Come over here and do this one. Goodbye. Goodbye. Okay, that's better. So, both sonnets, it doesn't matter what type. There are two essential types called the Petrarchan and the Shakespearean. So we have the Petrarchan, 13th century, and the Shakespearean. But it doesn't really matter which one you're writing. They all have three sections. They have what's called the proposition. Okay. I have great handwriting on the whiteboard. The proposition, and then the volta, and then the resolution. Now, if you don't know anything about sonnets, the volta is a fun word to know, and you can use it in your conversation to sound very smart. Okay, so the proposition is essentially a statement, right? Exactly what it is, saying this is an idea, right? The volta is the turn, okay? How did I write it here? I said that the volta is, yes, the turn. Voltas tend to be very short. They tend to be like, and yet, or despite. And they come in a very specific place in the 14 lines, because all sonnets are 14 lines. How the 14 lines are divided and where the volta comes depends on whether you're looking at a Shakespearean or a Petrarchan sonnet. So that's the kind of big thing there. So the proposition, let's see, is going to give you an idea. And then you have the resolution, which after thinking about the turn, which turns the proposition on its head. This is the conflict. The volta introduces the conflict. Self in conflict. All sonnets have a conflict, just like all stories have a conflict, where suddenly things will shift. You come in with a statement, then you say, but this statement is not quite true, and then you come up with the way in which it's not true. So it's almost as if sonnets are an attempt, the discovery of complexity, essentially, is how I would say that. There's nothing simple about sonnets. And it's the 14 lines that make them very, very difficult. So let's erase that now. And I need to get a better eraser because I'm going to be here for years. Here's an ASMR video entirely dedicated to erasing whiteboards. It might work. It might work. Goodbye. Goodbye, ideas. You know, it's kind of satisfying in its way. Goodbye. It was a very long video. Why? Because she spent the entire time erasing a whiteboard with the pencil tip. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, that's good enough. I'm not sure if we'll need this. I'll put this to the side. Okay, so the first section, as I've written here, is for enumeration, describing the situation. The volta comes and then shifts everything, and the resolution says, what do we know now, considering the volta? Okay, so the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan both have 14 lines of rhymed iambic pentameter, but the Shakespearean is separated like so. You have 12 lines. The Shakespearean has 12 lines, then the volta, and then a 2-line couplet, which acts as your resolution. So you'll notice here, if we consider sonnets like an argument, it's unbalanced. The resolution is much shorter than this. So if you want to spend more time on the proposition, on the enumeration, before you quickly reverse it, you would choose the Shakespearean. If you wanted a more even placement, you would choose the Petrarchan, because Petrarch here organizes it differently. This is how he does it. He does it with an octave, which, as you can imagine, is 8 lines, and a sextet, which you can imagine is 6 lines, so that of course equals 14. So what you get here is an octave dedicated to the proposition and a sextet dedicated to the resolution. You can already see that this is a far more even split than you have in the Shakespearean sonnet. But both are written in iambic. So let's get rid of that. Now that's what you have there. Boop, 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 boop. Goodbye. So you have those. So we'll look at an example. We'll look at that one, the Petrarchan one that I found, which is so beautiful. But first we need to think about what iambic pentameter is, because that can be hard, and we'll scan a Shakespearean sonnet rather than a Petrarchan, because Shakespeare is the iambic pentameter wizard, right? So each has a rhyme scheme, and I won't bother writing that down. Okay, this is the rhyme scheme of our sonnets. The Petrarchan will have an A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E, or C, D, C, D, C, D. That's your Petrarchan. Again, you have the octave and the sestet. The Shakespearean will have an A, B, A, B, a C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and a G, G. So this is a rhyming couplet. That's what makes the Shakespearean so peculiar. These will be instead divided into 2 quatrains, or essentially, 2 sonnets. 2 stanzas of 4 lines and 2 stanzas of 3 lines is how it will look when we read the Petrarchan. I prefer Petrarchan sonnets to Shakespearean sonnets, just because of their more equal division between the volta and the proposition. But that's just me. Now, Shakespeare writes in iambic pentameter. Petrarch doesn't. He has like 11 syllable, 7 syllable lines, so he's a bit different. We won't focus so much on the Petrarchan scanning, just because it's too much. We'll just do the Shakespearean, and with Petrarch we'll look more at his topics. So let's begin now with taking a look at the Shakespearean sonnets iambic pentameter. Those of you who don't know what iambic pentameter is, it is a system of unstressed and stressed syllables. Okay, and so let me explain this very quickly on the whiteboard, briefly. Let me just turn this off, and then we'll get to actually analyzing one of them. So iambic pentameter is a system, again, of poetic feet. Now, a poetic foot, it is going to be a couple of 2 syllables. And in iambic pentameter, you have an unstressed and then a stressed. And so this is one poetic foot. 1 foot. The U equals unstressed, and the slash equals stressed. And you can tell what's a stressed and unstressed syllable based on how we pronounce words. So an example is apple. Okay, we know apple is 2 syllables. Apple, apple. If you go in the dictionary online, when you see a word, there will be a little apostrophe in the word if it has multiple syllables, and that apostrophe will go before the stressed syllable. So apple, stress is in the first syllable. Apple. We don't say apple. That would sound insane, right? Apple. We say apple. So this is the stressed and this is the unstressed. So we would scan it like that. We go over the first syllable stressed, over the second syllable unstressed, and that's how you'd scan it. So you obviously could not begin a Shakespearean line with apple because it's reversed. The iambic feet in a Shakespearean sonnet must be unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. All right, and there will be 5 of these poetic feet. So let's erase. And we'll do a bit more of these stressed and unstressed in a second. Just erase that away. Get it gone. So Shakespearean sonnet iambic, and a lot of his plays written iambic pentameter will have, not everything, but really significant portions of his plays are written in iambic pentameter. The thing that you need to know, oh dear, is that there will be 5 feet, which means, of course, 10 syllables in this pattern. That's 2, 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. And that's how it works. You add that rhyme scheme in, and suddenly you have a very difficult structure. And when we think about Shakespeare, the amount of words he made up, he was a coiner. He did a lot of acts of coinage, which means making up words. You had to make up words in order to fit this very particular syllabic structure. So it is that prison, essentially, of the form that caused Shakespeare to innovate and essentially create the language we know. So this little architectural poem and this little structure of iambic pentameter actually brought us so many new words and so many words that we use today. So that's really fascinating. Rules, limits, stops. It forces us to innovate. And so when you have chaos, when you have lawlessness, it's difficult to innovate in that. You need boundaries, I think. You need to know things are certain. You need a sense of certainty in your life in order to really, truly innovate out of it. Just as the inventor, Daedalus, when he was in the maze, that was the moment when he was imprisoned that he invented the wings to escape it. So the sonnet represents that very same concept. Now, let's look again at some more syllabic or syllables in words so we can really understand how syllables and stressing and unstressing works. Stressed syllables tend to be higher pitched and unstressed lower pitched. And that's kind of how you can tell. All right. So what's another word we could use? Here are some: carrot. Okay. Or record. Record is an interesting word because depending on the stress, you actually have different meanings. So record, if I say record, record, that is a noun. But if I were to say record, if I were to switch it like this, record, it becomes a verb. Right, so the meaning of the word actually changes. So when you would use it in a line of iambic pentameter, depending on the stressing, it could be a completely different word. So there are some words that do that change based on their stresses. So we need to think about that as well. So anytime you're figuring out the stresses, you just say the word out loud. Oh dear. Very loud, isn't it? Okay, let's erase. I want a country house in the middle of nowhere where there's no sounds at all and just birds. Wouldn't that be nice? That's what I want. One day. One day I'll be living in complete isolation. Completely quiet isolation. Okay, so that being said, let's get out a Shakespearean sonnet so we can see how this breaks down. Put that away. I have a book of the sonnets here, but rather than look at this, we're going to just do a printout because it's easier. So let's put that away. We're looking mostly at love poetry today because so many sonnets are about love, particularly the Petrarchan. Oh dear. Where is it? Perhaps it's in my book. Let me book then. This is about aging, but I want the love poem. Let's find it. Let's find it. I'm just going to go through all of these sonnets until we find the one that I'm looking for. I believe it was like 103. Let's see. Which was not. Perhaps 133? Oh no. Ah, it was 130. Okay. So this is the poem that we'll look at. Get a pencil to scan. So I'm going to read it first and then we'll scan it. 130. Look for the proposition and the volta. We know that the volta will come in this last couplet. As you can see, this is a rhyming couplet, rare compare. So this is your couplet. And so the volta would he here and yet. So we can already tell this. So this is the proposition here. Okay. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground, and yet, by heaven, I think my love is rare, as any she belied with false compare. I love this poem because the proposition is speaking about how she's not beautiful, nor is she special. She's nothing that anyone would be jealous of. She's in fact quite ugly, right? She had black wires growing on her head. She had terrible breath, and she had a terrible voice. Her eyes were nothing like the sun. This is making fun of the blazon. And Petrarch, who we read now, is very much interested in the blazon, which is putting women on a pedestal and speaking to their beauty, speaking to their perfection. And Petrarch did that particularly with Laura, just like Dante had Beatrice, this unrequited love that he believed is a kind of perfection. A perfection probably bolstered up by the fact that he never really knew her and never became her lover, right? These women were never known as people, and that is why they were considered flawless. They were essentially deities, in a way. Deities that never knew or never had a flaw, that men could put on them all perfection and worship them under the name of love. And Petrarch had Laura, Dante had Beatrice, but Petrarch wrote his sonnets about Laura. He actually wrote something like 300 Petrarchan Italian sonnets to her. He was obsessed with her, although they never really knew each other, because when they met, allegedly, she was married, and so they never got together, essentially. But he put her on this pedestal, and it's through his love for her that he reflected on himself. So that love for her was very egotistical, I think. And so this sonnet is really making fun of that concept, where he's saying, my mistress is absolutely flawed, and yet I love her. And I think that this is a more real love than the Petrarchan love, because the Petrarchan love, again, is the ego. It's a kind of place for him to place all of his emotions and all of his self-reflection. She's a mirror, right? She's not a person. And we'll read a Christina Rossetti sonnet next, so you can see that, how she perceived like this Petrarchan love sonnet. Not to say that Petrarchan sonnets are not brilliant, because they are, and we'll read them as well. But we start here with the ridiculing of it. And let's scan it really quickly. My mistress' eyes. So my, we know, must be unstressed. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral See, this is interesting because normally I would say choral, but to fit it, it would have to be chorale. All right. So chorale is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wars, black wars grow on her head. I have seen roses oh, and here we go. This one is a little complicated, so let's think about it. I have seen roses masked red. Oh, I have seen roses masked red and white. Red and white. So it forces you to say damasked a little. Damasked, red and white. But no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight. All right, and then you keep going. So that's the iambic. You'll notice, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 poetic feet. What we're doing now is the process of scansion. That's when you determine the meter and the rhyme of a poem. We're scanning the poem. So let's determine the rhyme. I'll get my rhyme scheme out again. And we can determine the rhyme now. So let's take a look. Let's find it. There we are. Okay. So A, B, A, B. Let's see if it matches. Get this. So we can have both. And let's erase some of this so we can actually see it. Sun, A, red, B, done, A, head, B. Yep. White, C, cheeks, D, delight, C, reeks, D. No, E, sound, F, go, E, ground, F, G, rare, compare. Perfect sonnet. Fits everything, right? And we see again that reversal, that self in conflict, because despite, right, and yet despite, you have here the proposition, all that is wrong with her, but yet she is so flawless, so perfect. Right? That's the beauty of this sonnet. It's one of my favorites, particularly because it goes against, it goes against the common idea of the Petrarchan love sonnet. So let's look now at Petrarch, the one that would be divided differently. Or we could do one more. We could do this one. We'll finish off with that one. Be like a dessert. All right. So Petrarch, here, I'll get his Canzoniere, which is a book he wrote with a great deal for Laura, right? Sections from Canzoniere. Canzoniere. All right. I wanted to start with this component because it's pretty in my mind. I mean, it helps us understand this like kind of double paradox that exists in his work. But before we get there, we'll go to 134, which is written after Laura's death, where he becomes deeply depressed, right? She becomes a sort of angel. Really, when women die, they reach perfection with these men. Ignore my notes, because this is when I was 18. I read this when I was 18, and I was a bit silly at 18, so I don't really understand my notes at all. But my handwriting hasn't changed at all, which I find kind of cool. But this presents a paradox, so we'll read it. It's a very famous one that a lot of writers really like. Let me bring it down a little bit. I find no peace, and I am not at war. I fear and hope and burn, and I am ice. I fly above the heavens and lie on earth, and I grasp nothing and embrace the world. Remember, these are in translation from the Italian as well. Okay, let's read it. I find no peace, and I am not at war. I fear and hope and burn, and I am ice. I fly above the heavens and lie on earth, and I grasp nothing and embrace the world. One keeps me jailed who neither locks nor opens, nor keeps me for her own, nor frees the noose. Love does not kill, nor does he loose my chains. He wants me lifeless, but won't loosen me. I see with no eyes, shout without a tongue. I yearn to perish, and I beg for help. I hate myself and love somebody else. I thrive on pain and laugh with all my tears. I dislike death as much as I do life. Because of you, lady, I am this way. The entire thing is a paradox, as you see. And of course, lady, who is this Laura? Of course, blaming her for his suffering, for this paradox, for this desire to be released and the desire to be imprisoned. And so often this is the way that love is. Whenever I am in love, I find it to be one of the most miserable and beautiful moments. And I think probably you all feel the same way. You're racked with anxiety. Right? But also you want nothing more than to think of and be with that person. And yet that person is oftentimes the thing that makes your life miserable at the same time. The desire to be with them all the time, but the fear also to be with them all the time. The fear of losing oneself and the desire to lose oneself. These are all the quantities of love. I want to write that down, I think, very quickly, because it's... right, resolution versus catharsis again is a bit paradoxical as well, but the fear of losing oneself and the desire to lose oneself, those are the qualities of love. Makes one insane. The fear and the desire, these are commingled. Those two words come together, fear and desire. And that is love. I intend to look at a book on love, which is very strange, written by a German writer in the 60s, who was a great expressionist filmmaker as well. Not expressionist, but a modern German filmmaker, Alexander Kluge. I want to look at him next, and we'll discuss love a bit more. But so the Petrarchan love poems are a really great way to look at it. But the paradox is everywhere, and those who don't understand paradox is just contradictions. In that he is not at peace, but he's also not at war. He is both afraid and he hopes, right? Just like I said, fear and desire, fear and hope. I am on fire, but yet I am also so cold. I'm flying above the heavens, and yet I am dead on earth. And I grasp at nothing, and I embrace the world. I'm holding nothing, and yet I embrace everything. It's fascinating. I love it. Paradox is so brilliant. And so you'll see here the Petrarchan, this is 4/4, so this is your octave. And then you have 3/3, you have your sextet here. Oops, I'm so sorry. So you do have all of that. To speak of the double paradox, however, we'll go now to where the introduction writes about it to his book. And it's all about really a self-reflection on the nature of writing as well. Writing, I think, is an act of love. It is an act of love for life. When I write, it's because I love things. When I write, it's because I've seen something that I want to capture and to keep in the way you keep a person. Or you try to. I always found that life every day has a novel in it, literally every day. And I'll show you what I've been working on later. But anyway, It is especially in the second part of the Canzoniere that we find frequent allusions to the act of writing, a reminder of the self-consciousness both of the poet and his poems. And this comes back to that thesis we saw at the beginning, that self-consciousness was born with the sonnet. The poet finds that he is unable to write and yet is forced to write. Writing helps him, yet it is writing that makes him suffer because of his love, for which only writing can provide the cure. It is a double paradox. Love leads to poetry, while poetry creates love and preserves it, and poetry will earn fame for its creator and assure him a place in posterity. But here we go, we're speaking of the love, particularly for Laura. The existence of Petrarch's Laura is certainly as real as that of Dante's Beatrice, and both ladies exist for many of the same reasons. Above all, Laura was the epitome of excellence, one that never changes, right? Right? Women are not allowed to change. Never, never, never. She is a poet's inspiration, the ornament of his verse. The reader of the Canzoniere, however, is not long into the poems before he or she realizes that Laura is not the main subject of the work. Petrarch himself is its subject and center, and the work itself is his own psychoanalytical notebook, an ever-changing portrait of the self. Okay, so when we see, is he speaking of Laura really in this poem? No, right? He is placing onto her all of his emotions. He is saying, from you spells my misery, but also from you spells my joy, right? She is really responsible for everything he thinks about himself. And that's why women are so often, I think, blamed for the state of men's emotions. So often. They are a place where men may put their emotions. We are like objects, receptacles for men's rages, for their passions, for their obsessions. And women, we must take it, because that is our job. And their immense feelings for us turn us into those objects, right? So we'll speak now to Christina Rossetti, who had the same feeling that I just stated, who wrote a sonnet much like this one. And so let's go now to Christina Rossetti. Who speaks to what I have just said. Okay. She wrote in the artist's studio. I wrote a bit. She lived 1830 to 1894. She was known for The Goblin Market, which is a children's story. Brilliantly written. Brilliantly. We should do Goblin Market. It's so good. In the artist's studio. Here we go. One face looks out from all his canvases. One self-same figure sits or walks or leans. We found her hidden just behind those screens. That mirror gave back all her loveliness. A queen in opal or in ruby dress. A nameless girl in freshest summer greens. A saint, an angel, every canvas means. The same one meaning neither more nor less. He feeds upon her face by day and night. And she with true kind eyes looks back on him, fair as the moon and joyful as the light. Not wan with waiting, nor with sorrow dim, not as she is, but when hope shone bright, not as she is, but as she fills his dream. Ah, this is so beautiful. It's exactly what I've just said. One face. So this is saying that in the eyes of a man, all women are the same. Then in a passionate, obsessive man, he turns every woman into the same woman. Shakespeare didn't, though, did he? Very unique woman, unique in her ugliness, right? It's almost as uniqueness is created by ugliness. One face, all women captured in men's art are the same woman. One self-same figure sits or walks or leans. Every time a woman poses for a portrait, she is the same woman. We found her hidden just behind those screens. That mirror gave back all her loveliness. And here we see, much like with Petrarch, that Laura is really a mirror for his own feelings, right? That women are solely, in this case, when they are idolized, when they are created and thought of as something that ought to be protected, ought to be worshipped, they become just mirrors for men's feelings and thoughts, just as deities are. Gods are mirrors, right, for men's worries, for men's desires, for men's fears. And the woman becomes that as well when she is deified by the pedestal. A queen in opal or ruby, in a ruby dress, a nameless girl in freshest summer greens, a saint and angel. Every canvas means the same one meaning. So a queen will become the same as a nameless girl. To capture her in love from man, obsession and worship, it means that she is the same as a girl. It doesn't, no matter how royal, how special, how extraordinary you are in a photograph dedicated to your worship, to your beauty, you are the same as any beautiful woman. And I feel that way, right? When you go online and you see all these pictures of girls and women trying to be beautiful, they all look the same. You know, it's very rare that you kind of find one that sticks out. And the ones that stick out are often the ones that are not conventionally beautiful, that they are not performing that kind of beauty. The same one meaning neither more nor less. He feeds upon her face by day and night, and so there's this animalistic sense that he's taking her, he's feeding upon her, he's gaining his own strength through her. Diminishment, right? The more she diminishes, the stronger he becomes. And she, with true kind eyes, looks back on him, fair as the moon and joyful as the light. I mean, women, we allow this. We're almost grateful to be taken in such a way. Certainly I am. I think this is one of my greatest flaws. Like, I love for a man to put upon me all of his hatreds and his anger. For some reason, it makes me feel oddly protected. And that comes back to the paradox that I think Petrarch was talking about. When a man does these things, it does make you feel safe in a way. It's the paradox of not being able to love without feeling some pain. And you kind of crave both equally, or at least I have. But I think that's probably a very unhealthy way to love, and I ought to change that. I ought to change the desire to take in all of those negative emotions as if I am somehow worth more because I'm capable of doing that, or I'll be worth something to the man if I am capable of doing that. I think it's a, really kind of messed up, masochistic way of looking at things, but yeah, whatever. Not what we're talking about now. Let's look at the rhyme scheme here and determine what type of sonnet this is. So let's do that. Already, you see there's no rhyming couplet at the end, so we're going to go probably Petrarchan. But sonnets don't necessarily have to follow the rules. The rules are made to be broken, aren't they? But I'm guessing because this seems such a response to the Petrarchan mode of love poetry, that this is a Petrarchan. So let's take a look at the rhyme scheme now. We'll remember what it is because I haven't got this memorized. So it would be A, B, B, A if it's a Petrarchan. So A, B, lean screens, loveliness, A, canvases, loveliness, dress would be C, greens is D, means is D, dress less, C. Night would be canvases, loveliness, dress is actually not a C, it's actually an A. I messed that up. And greens and means is actually a BB. Petrarchans are so hard. Like, can you imagine writing one of these? That's a BB. And this S would be an A, so I actually got it wrong. Okay, there we go. An A. A night and a light, we're going to look at that. That is now a C, and a C, him would be a D. Dim is a D, bright is a C, and a dream is something else entirely, isn't it? That's actually going up to a B. No, I'm sorry. But it's not a D. She breaks it here, I think. Dream is just a E. Yeah? Wait, now I'm confused. I've confused myself. So him, dim, bright light, E. Okay. So ABBA is Petrarchan, ABBA is Petrarchan, CDC is Petrarchan, DC is Petrarchan. This should be a D. She breaks it on the last line. So let's think about what that means. Breaks Petrarchan rhyme scheme on last line on dream. It's fascinating because it's all about how she is his dream, and that's all she's allowed to be. But if you break the rhyme scheme, if you break the cage on the last line, I think it does say something about how the knowledge that this is happening, right, gives the woman the ability to escape. And so the fact that she breaks the rhyme scheme on this line is actually really, really impressive. I'm hoping it's not that I've just got the rhyme scheme wrong. But we're going to go with that she broke the Petrarchan on the last line. I think that's what we'll go with. This kind of fascinating just dissolution of the form in that last rhyme on dream. Dream breaks the sonnet, the whole sonnet, the architecture, it falls apart. So this idea of the woman being a reflection or a receptacle for man's emotions and ego is broken on the word dream, and it is his dream, but his dream doesn't fit. Perhaps it is her dream instead. Really cool. Now let's look at another love sonnet, and this is my favorite sonnet ever written, ever. Let's see. I don't know a sonnet I love more. And it's again very much like the love sonnets that that Shakespeare writes. And again, it's a Petrarchan. And I just do find that Petrarchan sonnets are more beautiful for some reason. And this one is split up very particularly. You know, Christina's was not, or Rossetti was not. Hers was in a one giant block of text, a bit like a cage. It really emphasized the cage-like nature of it. This is clearly in an octave, and it's clearly in a sextet. All right. Edna St. Vincent Millay. What lips my lips have kissed, and where and why, I have forgotten, and what arms have lain under my head till morning, but the rain is full of ghosts tonight, the tap and sigh upon the glass and listen for reply. And in my heart there stirs a quiet pain for unremembered lads that not again will turn to me at midnight with a cry. Thus in winter stands the lonely tree, nor knows what birds have vanished one by one, yet knows its boughs more silent than before. I cannot say what loves have come and gone. I only know that summer sang in me a little while, that in me sings no more. Oh, I absolutely love this poem. It's beautiful because it's a woman talking about love. And not just one love, right? Not one lover. There were so many lovers, and now she can't remember them. It's about forgetting, and the terrible feeling of forgetting love, of falling out of love, of losing love, and of reflecting back on it. And the volta here is clearly here. That's the volta. And it's separating from herself, right? This is all about herself. And then it moves into this nature, a metaphor. And that creates in this sense that her feelings are universal. That in the tree, right, watching itself die, no longer filled with leaves, its branches bare. It's not a safe place for birds anymore. They won't nest there. The feeling of being left behind is just so beautiful. For unremembered lads that not again will turn to me at midnight with a cry. And so there's an honesty and a self-reflection there, a kind of thing that you can only really say quietly. And I think that's what sonnets are. They're intensely private, perhaps a predecessor or a precursor rather to the confessional, where the poetry in which you say everything, your deepest secrets, and you put into poetry and you tell people, you confess, right? Sonnets are so much confessions. They're statements. They're the discovering of contradiction. But this one is not directly contradictory, right? It's talking about forgetting and its relationship to love. We're not talking about fear, suffering, and its relationship to love, right? Well, we are to an extent, but it's not a suffering like Petrarch's. It's a silent kind of letting go. It's a mourning. I think it's a mourning. His was not mourning. Even the death of Laura, he was not mourning her. I think that that's important. It was a place for him to just explore his own passions. It wasn't mourning. This is mourning. You can feel really the loss of those men. They feel like they're in this poem to me because they are the birds, right? We can hear them. We can watch them vanish. And so you see, like the Petrarchan sonnet is about Laura's death, but is it anything about Laura? Is she in it at all? No. But here there are men, right? And we can feel the ways in which the men made her feel. And it just doesn't feel like an expression of the ego, but rather the state of disappearing. And so it's interesting, like, that a woman might feel, as men cease to love her, that she herself is gone, right? Without those men who would cry to her at midnight, she ceases to exist. And so in a lot of ways it kind of has the same feeling as the Rossetti poem, the same feeling as the Petrarch, that women are so often reflections. And when nobody looks into them for their own reflection anymore, the woman disappears. And I think, for me, I'm always fighting that desire to find myself in men. I'm fighting that so often. And, men want to see the reflection that makes them feel good about themselves, don't they? So that's why they seek out certain ones. But that's all a very negative and very intensely personal look at love and relationships, and very different than the look that I'll give us next video when I look at Alexander Kluge. It'll be very, very different. But yeah, that's my favorite sonnet, and it's clearly a Petrarchan. We could go through the rhyme scheme, and maybe we should, but I think this video is getting a bit long, so we won't. But that's the sonnet. Read Petrarch. He's a fantastic writer. Let me give you one more from Petrarch. I feel like we should end not with my words, but someone else's. So let's go to Petrarch one last time. Here we go. 365. I go my way regretting those past times I spent in loving something which was mortal, instead of soaring high, since I had wings that might have taken me to higher levels. You who see all my shameful wicked errors, King of all heaven, invisible, immortal, help this frail soul of mine, for she has strayed, and all her emptiness fill up with grace, so that, having once lived in storms at war, I may now die in peace, in port, and if my stay was in vain, at least let my departure count. Over that little life that still remains to me, and at my death deign that your hand be present. You are only hope I have. Okay, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful sleep, a wonderful rest, and seek out some sonnets, perhaps even write your own. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you.